Greetings from Addis Ababa and welcome to Pulse of Africa News Hour. I am Magdalene Tinaga, bringing you the latest developments shaping Africa and beyond. Let us begin with Ethiopia's urban development. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has described Addis Ababa's Riverside development project as a transformative urban renewal initiative that is reshaping the capital city, generating employment opportunities and advancing sustainable development. He also said that it is far more than a riverbank beautification effort that is being done in the capital, describing it as a comprehensive urban transformation program that is redefining the city's landscape while also creating jobs and expanding economic opportunities. In a social media post, the Prime Minister noted that the project stretches across the Ntoto-Peacock corridor and the Ntoto-Kabana corridor, extending up to 50 meters beyond the river banks. He said the initiative is creating green corridors, public gathering spaces, pedestrian-friendly walkways, and recreational facilities and commercial areas that are contributing to the city's modernization. And the project's impact extends beyond physical infrastructure, he said, and also further noted that the development has created employment opportunities for thousands of people in the area of construction, engineering, landscaping, logistics, and related sectors, while also opening new business prospects for the local contractors, suppliers, and service providers. The Premier emphasized that much of the project designs and implementation has been undertaken by Ethiopian professionals themselves, which will be demonstrating the country's growing expertise in urban planning, infrastructure development, and project execution. Prime Minister Abiy also highlighted the environmental benefits of the initiative, other than beautifying the capital, noting that areas previously used as dumping sites and prone to flooding have been transformed into cleaner, greener, and healthier public spaces. Communities living along the river banks are also expected to benefit from the improved environmental conditions and enhanced public amenities, he added. The Prime Minister said the integration of commercial facilities with public and environmental spaces illustrates how economic development and ecological restoration can complement each other or can be done parallelly. Describing the project as a long-term investment in the city's future, Prime Minister Abiy said the Riverside Development Initiative is helping build a greener, more connected, economically vibrant, and people-centered Addis Ababa for future generations. We're now moving to our second news as Ethiopia hosts South Sudanese envoys for a strategic program. In East Africa, a 5-day diplomatic training and visit program for South Sudanese diplomats is currently underway in the capital Addis Ababa. It is organized by the Ethiopian Institute of Foreign Affairs. The summit runs from the 5th to the 9th of June, focusing on shared economic vulnerabilities, border infrastructure, and resource management. In the opening session, the chief of the Ethiopian Institute of Foreign Affairs, Jafar Badru, framed the bilateral alliance as a mutual strategic partnership based on sovereignty and shared interest.
This is not Ethiopia rescuing South Sudan, of course, and nor South Sudan leaning on Ethiopia. It is two neighbors widening the world for each other. Trust sits beneath all of this, and trust is made of choices. This past year, the South Sudanese government made choices of its own about who it wants to be close to its frontier, and which partnerships truly service South Sudanese interests. We noticed, and we are grateful knowing such trust is offered by a sovereign nation and must be honored the same way.
Speaking on behalf of the 20 visiting delegates, the South Sudan Deputy Head of Mission, Ambassador Boutros Thok-Deng, addressed the heavy mandate placed on his team. He also noted that the traditional role of a foreign envoy is rapidly shifting under the global pressures, while also expressing gratitude to the host nation, Ethiopia.
Diplomacy today operate in increasing complex international world. Diplomats are expected not only to present their countries, but also to contribute to the peace building. Conflict resolution, regional integration, economic cooperation, international partnership continues to learn capacity building, which is what you are doing today. You are increasing your capacity building, which we thank the government Federal of the Republic of Ethiopia.
According to the official schedule, the delegation will be spending the coming days analyzing Pan-Africanism and the legal frameworks of the transboundary resources, specifically focusing on the Nile River. And the curriculum also includes extensive sessions on the UN and the AU peacekeeping operations. The program is expected to conclude on the 9th of June following a certificate award ceremony and a bilateral discussions at the Ethiopian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The African Union and Global Financial Integrity signs an anti-corruption pact. In a landmark move for financial accountability on the African continent, the African Union Advisory Board Against Corruption and Global Financial Integrity officially signed a memorandum of understanding today in Arusha, Tanzania. The signing ceremony marks the formal beginning of a two-year strategic partnership aimed at tackling two of the African's most devastating financial threats, which are corruption and illicit financial flows. The African Union Advisory Board Against Corruption was represented at the signing by its chairperson, Adam Senanu, while Global Financial Integrity was represented by Philip Nakwindi Gichina, GFI's Policy Director for Africa. The AUABC's mission includes promoting anti-corruption measures on the continent and also collecting and documenting information on the nature and scope of corruption, developing methodologies for analyzing corruption in Africa, and advising governments on how to deal with the scourge of corruption in their domestic jurisdictions. Through high-caliber analysis, fact-based advocacy, and to promote beneficial ownership and a cloud-based database to crucial trade fraud, GFI aims to address the harms inflicted by trade misinvoicing, transitional crime, tax evasion, and kleptocracy. GFI has been particularly active in Africa, partnering with government and civil society organizations to improve financial transparency and also at the national level. Illicit financial flows drain Africans' resources, undermining public services and economic growth. And experts warn that without coordinated institutional action, the continent risks losing billions more in a stolen wealth that could otherwise fund schools, hospitals, and infrastructures. And now with the MOU signed, the African Union Advisory Board Against Corruption and Global Financial Integrity are expected to roll out joint research, policy advocacy, and capacity building initiatives across the continent over the next 2 years. Welcome back, viewers. Africa wants a bigger seat at the table. This was the message the Kenyan President William Ruto and the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa have transferred after the meeting in Pretoria just this week. And the two leaders say Africa can no longer afford to simply watch major decisions being made about Africa, while those decisions, even without including Africa, will directly or indirectly be affecting the continent. And instead, they believe the continent should have a stronger voice and a greater say in shaping the future. And speaking after their meetings, the two leaders speaking after the talk said that Africa should never be afraid to speak up for what they actually feel that they deserve. And in a moment that caught the people's attention was a joke that the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa made. He said that we Africans are noisy and we will always keep to be noisy when it comes to our rightful place in the world. It might seem just a simple joke, but it has a bold message embedded into it. And President Ruto, the Kenyan president, also agreed to the specific message, and he said that Africa is no longer standing on the sidelines and watching the world making decisions that will affect us without consolidating us. And the continent is becoming an important player in global conversations and helping shape decisions that affect millions of people. But this wasn't just about political insights. In fact, the two leaders also discussed how African countries can work more closely together, because one of the problems that we Africans are facing to have a sit in the global arena is that we do not work together, and there's a problem of unity among Africans themselves. They also talked about improving roads, railways, and other infrastructure, boosting trade between African nations, that is funding the AfCFTA to help the nation as a whole, and also creating more opportunities for business and young people, as Africa is one of the youngest continents in the world. And the meeting came during President Ruto's official visit to South Africa, and as a part of a wider effort to strengthen one of the two countries with huge economies across the continent. And at the heart of the discussion was a very simple question. If Africa is a home to nearly 1/5 of the world's population, why doesn't it have a stronger voice when the global decisions are being made? And as an example to these can be the United Nations seat. Africa has one of the countries that have actually made the implementations of the United Nations possible, but still for decades we lack the permanent seat that we needed in the United Nations. And for years, African leaders have argued that organizations like the IMF and the World Bank do not give the continent enough influence that they should have, especially as the fact that we contribute a lot to the world economy. And they also said the rules of the global system were largely written decades ago. And of course, they did not participate most of the African countries, and they no longer reflect today's realities. Now, African countries are pushing for change, whether it's debt, climate funding, technology, or economic development, and leaders across the continent want Africa to speak with one strong voice, that we need a permanent seat in huge tables across the world. And the message from Pretoria was very clear and very bold, that Africa does not want to be invited into the conversation after the decision has already been made and the effect of the decisions being seen visibly. It wants to be in the room when those decisions are being made at first. We're now shifting to this hour's business news. We have Dangote Refinery strengthens Africa's energy security with up to 700,000 barrels per day. Nigeria's Dangote Petroleum Refinery has ramped up crude processing to 700,000 barrels per day during a performance test by process licensors exceeding its nameplate capacity of 650,000 barrels per day and marking a significant operational milestone, and the company said on Thursday. The achievement demonstrates the refinery's ability to process additional feedstock while also optimizing performance across its production units. Devakumar Edwin, Vice President of Oil and Gas at Dangote Industries, said the ramp-up forms part of a wider plan to expand capacity to 1.4 million BPD within 30 months, a level that could make the facility one of the largest globally. It supplies domestic markets and also exports to African countries in Europe, including the United Kingdom, France, and the Netherlands, while also shipping products to the United States and Saudi Arabia. Dangote Refinery has also strengthened its role as a stabilizer in the oil and gas industry, given the ongoing disruptions caused by the Middle East tension, as a result of which many African countries are now patronizing the refinery for energy security. In a further demonstration of its growing global significance, Dangote Petroleum Refinery became the world's largest exporter of jet fuel in April, according to S&P Global Commodities. Looking ahead now, Aliko Dangote has outlined an ambitious plan to transform the facility into the world's largest refinery by 2028, targeting a processing capacity of about 1.4 million barrels per day. We're now heading to this hour's sport news. The Netherlands lost to Algeria, a pre-World Cup wake-up call, says Coman. The Netherlands' 1-0 home defeat to Algeria in a World Cup warm-up on Wednesday has been described by coach Ronald Koeman as a wake-up call ahead of the next week tournament in the United States. Algeria scored a late winner on the eve of the Dutch squad's departure for New York, where they are scheduled to face World Cup debutants Uzbekistan in another friendly on Monday. Koeman expressed frustration after the match, saying the result should not have happened at all. He said, "I absolutely hate losing. This was a match we should have won." He said, "We have to win these kinds of home matches because our ranking position demands it." He added that the Netherlands ranked 8th, controlled by the opening 25 minutes and created several clear chances, but also failed to capitalize, allowing the game to slip away from them. Because you do not put the game to bed within those first 25 minutes, you end up playing against yourselves, Koeman said. If you get 4 or 5 clear chances, you have to score. Algeria's Anis Hadji Moussa scored the decisive goal 4 minutes before the time to seal the upset and dampen the Dutch squad's preparation ahead of their departure. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast from across the continent. And with that, we conclude these hour's headlines, but the conversation does not end here. For more updates and in-depth coverage, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on our Facebook page, and stay connected on TikTok. For the latest news, I am Magdalite Nagga for Pulse of Africa. Coming up next is our weekly program Roundup. You do not want to miss it. Thank you for watching and goodbye.
On the 1st of June 2026, Ethiopia stood firm against an intensely orchestrated Western media campaign designed to discredit the nation's 7th general election. While many outlets portrayed that the process failed to meet international standards, the reality told a different story. Ethiopians turned out in massive numbers, filling polling stations across the country with determination and pride. The election unfolded peacefully, conducted with a democratic spirit and resilience. Reports from IGAD and the African Union confirmed that the process was not only calm and orderly, but also aligned with international principles and frameworks of credible elections. In a notable shift, even the European Union welcomed the finding of IGAD in the African Union, acknowledging Ethiopia's achievement in delivering a democratic exercise that defied external doubt. This is your weekly roundup. I am Zelalem Ibeltal, joined by my colleagues Magdalite Naga and Gamachsa Mandida. Do stay with us. Hello to you all. Pulse of Africa has been providing intense and extensive media coverage of the 7th general election. Pulse of Africa has also deployed journalists across the country in different regional states of Ethiopia and 2 city administrations of Addis Ababa and Doredoa. And apparently Magdalite was in the Oromia regional state of Ethiopia, and you have been covering stories from Bashasha, Agaro and Jimma. And of course, Bashasha, the birth town of His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. And we have been following through the voting process there in Bashasha polling station, where His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed also casted his vote. And Magdalite, can you give us a brief glimpse into the voting process there? And we're going to go in little tips to the whole election aspects.
No. Well, first, thank you, Zelalem, and thank you, Gamachis, for having me today. So, as you stated earlier, we started our journey from Jimma, and then we moved to Bashasha, and then we came to Agaro. So, let me give you a list of things that stood out to me as I was giving a direct live coverage of the 7th general election from Jimma. The first is the turnout of the people. We know that millions of citizens were registered to elect on the 7th general election, and that was the same to those 3 states. As you know, those 3 states are rural communities, and it was very unexpected for much people to be aware of the election and for millions to go and cast their votes in the ballot stations or in the polling stations. And then the next was the patience of the voters. I mean, it took, the election took place from 12 in the morning to past midnight. And the voters were lining up in queues, women's and children's carrying their babies. There were a lot of barriers, such as the weather, logistic problems. As I said, we were in rural communities, and it took a lot of long hours for people to come to their polling stations. We also have the excitement that we saw in the polling stations was very unacceptable. People were very excited, and they believed that their voice really mattered and that they were participating in a national event that determines the future of the country's politics, economy, and social development as well. Another thing was the fact that, people from different backgrounds, different religion, culture, and language came together for this national election, believing that their voice matters. Zelalem, as we were actually down there, what really surprised me personally, specifically, was the level of awareness even in the rural parts of Ethiopia. I mean, you do not expect much of these communities to understand democracy, the impact of election, and the fact that their voice will matter. But in Bashasha, Agaro, and Jimma, that was what we were actually looking at. They were very aware. They knew how much of impact this would mean to the entire Ethiopia, and it was so amazing and unexpected for us. Also, the fact that, whenever you think of an African election, it's usually, military people organizing. The atmosphere is very scary, and then the people are not that much active in such progress. But that was not the case in the places that I was down on reporting. The people by themselves were the organizers of the elections. They honored the process. Lastly, we know that Ethiopia called out for the IGAD and African Union to observe these elections. When we think of African election, again, as most of the time is the EU or the other Western observers that usually sit to determine the fate of this election. But that was very different when we come to the 7th general election, as it was IGAD and the African Union that were there to observe the election. One last thing, Zalalam, is that, we saw a lot of international medias from across the globe who were down there reporting directly from Bashasha, Garo, and Jumma general elections. So those were the topics that I observed down from these 3 states.
Amazing. You have brought so many interesting points regarding the voting process conducted in Western Oromia region, in Jimma, Bashasha, and Dagaro, and the fact that you elaborated the points interestingly very well, Magdalite. For example, the awareness of voters, the awareness of the general public regarding the election was amazing. The National Election Board of Ethiopia cooperated with different civil society organizations in the country to provide voters education about the election, the impact of election, the impact of not voting, and the impact of the positive impacts that can be endured by voting our candidates. So that was very much interesting. Gamats, you and I were reporting the 7th general election from Pulse of Africa's headquarters from this magnificent studio. And we have been receiving various footage and stories regarding the 7th general election from different parts of the country, from Amhara, Sidama, southern nations and nationalities and peoples of Ethiopia, and from many regions of the country. And we have also receiving reports from different institutions such as the National Election Board of Ethiopia, civil society organizations, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, IGAD, the African Union, and many other organizations. Can you give us a brief background into the election process, the voting process went on during the 1st of June 2026?
Yeah, of course, Zalalam. These elections were unprecedented in that they had voter participation that is of the highest number, maybe the highest figure in the country's democratic history. Now, we ask, a question: how is it possible that, voters as many as 54 million and plus and above could participate in these elections? Well, I think mobilization campaigns have played their big role. For example, the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia has played big role in this case. Of course, the government, civil society groups, and political parties launched nationwide campaigns utilizing, a variety of outlets such as radio, television, social media, and community outreach programs to educate citizens about the importance of voting. And following that, people could have, a rise in awareness regarding the importance or the benefit of having these elections. And youth engagement is, of course, one of them. Many young people out of these 54 million, most of them are young people, and youth-led organizations organize door-to-door campaigns encouraging, young people to participate, young voters to participate, recognizing their potential to influence the future. So the participation of young people has been so incredibly high, and I think that's played a big role. But at the same time, community leadership, local elders and religious leaders actively urged community members to vote. Well, religious leaders are charismatic leaders. They don't enforce on people to do this and that, but they have, their own peculiar way of convincing people to do what they want them to do. And in this case, the fact that, these charismatic leaders, religious leaders, educated people reinforced the participation of young people, especially.
And as we all said, the 7th general election of Ethiopia has many unique features. For example, if you see the number of voters, the number of people registered for voting, more than 54 million people, and we have seen, strong and democratic competition among political parties. There are more than 40 political parties, alongside dozens of independent political candidates, and we have seen a strong competition between and among those political parties. There were also observers from domestic and international observers. For example, domestically, we have seen observers like Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, and Ethiopian Human Rights Commission deployed its observers across the country, and it has come to the report that there has no fundamental human rights violation so far during the voting day and after the voting day, and that has been a good news for the country, which has been grappling with lots of human and democratic rights violations. And we have also seen another domestic observer, the Coalition of Ethiopian Civil Society Organizations for Elections, and this organization also reported that the 7th general election undergone in a democratic and in smooth manner. Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the Coalition of Ethiopian Civil Society Organization for Elections. Both organizations deployed thousands of observers across the country, and they observed the election process, and they also forwarded their recommendations to the stakeholders, such as to the National Election Board of Ethiopia, to the government of Ethiopia, and to national and international organizations. And I'm very much encouraged by their reports. After 2018 Ethiopian political reform, there has been a series of reforms in the areas of court, reform in the area of judicial system, reform in many political and economic arena. And I think we have been witnessing, and we are looking the fruits of those reforms. Because of the reforms, and now we have been able to see independent and professional, neutral, impartial organizations such as Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. And we have also seen observers from regional and continental organizations. We have seen IGAD and the African Union. Both organizations observed Ethiopia's 7th general election according to the request from the National Election Board of Ethiopia and from Ethiopian government. And Magdaletes, during your report there in the Western Oromia region, in towns like Bashasha, Jimma and Agaro, I think you got the opportunity to talk to residents of those towns like Bashasha, Agaro and Jimma. What did they say to you? I mean, you also got another awesome opportunity to talk to His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, and what did he say regarding the 7th general election, and what was your questions?
So one of the reasons that Pulse of Africa went down to Bashasha was, as you earlier tried to state, was as it's the hometown of the current Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed. His Excellency gave his first message was that he worries more for the candidates than he does to the voters, because he even warned the candidates, saying that it's a huge responsibility to be competing to become a leader for such a huge country, and that they should be notified of all the responsibilities and the courage it takes while also participating in this election. His other message was also about that he and his party, what he and his party, Prosperity Party, has been doing for the last 5 years was just a beginning, and that there is a lot that should be done, and that there's a lot that he would like to do if he gets the chance for the next 5 years. And not only that, Zelalem, he also gave specifically an answer to Pulse of Africa. This is what he said specifically to Pulse of Africa. As we asked him what the 7th general election, what Africa could learn from this election, he stated that as long as African leaders are willing to conduct democracy and elections in the continent, the 7th general election shows how these citizens are willing to work with the government and to support the government in any needed aspect. So these were the main messages given. As to the people that we tried to talk, it is known that we've been to 3 different states. They're very excited. And also, one thing that we would like to tell mostly is that, there are a lot that has been said about the 7th general elections from the Western side, from international medias, and so on. The citizens are very aware of the current situation of Ethiopia, but they're also willing to stand together with the government in order to cast their voice and to determine the next phase of the country through their voices. And they're very excited. and very aware. That's what we could say about the citizens, Zelana.
Very encouraging words from citizens and from His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed. Pulse of Africa, established by the initiative of His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed. In the 35th ordinary session of the African Union, His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed spoke regarding the significance of establishing Pan-African Media Organization, which can speak about the challenge of Africa, the triumphs of Africa, the success of Africa, the achievement and challenge of Africa. African stories need to be told by Africans, and that was the idea and the initiative of His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed. And based on his initiation, we have established Pulse of Africa. And now we have been providing African stories from the sport. And it's great that, Magdala, you have brought this idea. Government, IGAD in the African Union, the two Pan-African organizations, released a preliminary report on the 3rd of June 2026 regarding the 7th general election. You can move to IGAD's report, which released a few days ago on the 3rd of June 2026. Government.
Yes, well, the election board, the electoral board of Ethiopia, the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia, has done an incredible job in this regard by involving various stakeholders, the ones you mentioned as well, and also the international or the regional organizations such as the African Union and IGAD, to involve in these observatory activities. Well, the leaders of these observatory institutions or organizations, the AU and IGAD, they were stationed in Addis Ababa, but their colleagues, of course, moved to various parts of Ethiopia to watch, how the election was going on. And these organizations you mentioned now, which are Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, has also deployed its staff across the country to see how these elections were going on, and especially they were looking for if there were any kind of human rights violations. And fortunately, there was none, we can say. No reports have been made regarding any undesirable activity regarding human rights. So this shows that the board, the electoral board, has been working with these stakeholders very closely, and they were communicating with one another. And as we, as the two of us, reported from this studio, reports were dispatched from the leaders of these organizations, of course, confirming that no act that violated human rights occurred, which was, very good news. And high level of participation amongst these staffs have been observed very well.
IGAD, as we know, came to Ethiopia based on the invitation of Ethiopian government in the National Election Board of Ethiopia. By the way, this also should show the confidence of the Ethiopian government in the National Election Board of Ethiopia. The Ethiopian government want this election to be transparent, and they want to be, they are very much confident to be accountable on the election process, and that's why they invited regional organizations such as IGAD and the Continental Organization, the African Union. That being said, IGAD said lots of things about the 7th parliamentary and regional state councils election. For example, IGAD commended the fact that massive education was given for voters, like Magdalite said earlier on. Voters had awareness about the election, about the political parties, about the candidates that they are casting, and so on. So IGAD appreciated those voters' education, massive voters' education, and political parties had got the chance to talk about themselves, to express themselves, to sell themselves to voters. And we have also seen that political parties were contesting in different Ethiopian language. In the previous elections, there was only one language, the language of the federal government, Amharic. But in the 7th general election, the National Election Board of Ethiopia, has enabled, political parties to contest, to compete, and to express their thoughts and perspectives on different Ethiopian languages. And the IGAD election observation mission was led by the former deputy president of Uganda, Dr. Kazibwe, and IGAD has deployed dozens of observers throughout the country, and the observation was that there is no violation of human rights, and the election has conducted in a peaceful manner. And IGAD also appreciated the National Election Board of Ethiopia's staff. They were very much professional, they were very much neutral, and IGAD also appreciated the security forces. As we know, security forces were deployed in various parts of the country, and they were discharging their responsibility according to the professional standards and principles. And IGAD also expressed its steadfast commitment to working with Ethiopia to deepen democracy in the country. We have been saying that the Western media campaign against Ethiopia was huge. In fact, those media campaign was very much deliberate, and the intention and the motive of which was to force people to stay at home so that voting couldn't be conducted according to the schedule. But as we have seen, and at the National Election Board of the chairperson of the National Election Board of Ethiopia, Melatur Hailu, said, there was high voter turnout. Election polls, polling stations were opened at 6 a.m. early in the morning, and it went through the midnight, and it was concluded and ended in a peaceful manner. And that shows the fact that Ethiopians defied the Western media narratives, and how the significance of such kind of continental organizations such as the African Union in deepening democracy in Africa. African leaders, African politicians used to open their ear for Westerners. African politicians want to hear from European Union and from organizations apart from the continent. So how African politicians need to embrace their own continental organizations such as the African Union in installing and nurturing genuine democracy in the continent.
Well, thank you again, Zelalem. As I was trying to mention earlier, I think this is one of the huge success that Ethiopia has achieved in the 7th general election, is that Ethiopia has always been a leading country when it comes to Pan-Africanism, and that is what we saw in this general election. Because whenever we think of an African election, it's in our histories that we used to go ask Westerns or people that are outside of our continent to observe and to tell us the final result of the election. But that is not what happened today. As you mentioned for the international media, Zelalem, as Pulse of Africa, I think this is one of our initiatives, is to defend Africans and to tell the stories from an African side. One of the reasons that we went down even to Bashasha Jamana Garo to give a live coverage is to show to the world, to show to Africans on how the actual story was going on, because that is not what we usually find when it comes to the Western medias. And this election was a proof of that. Another fact that I'd like to mention is that the one thing that was again and again being mentioned across those medias is that the election is not fair and democratic. But what is a democratic election, Zelalem? A democratic election is basically a free, fair, and a transparent. And the 7th general election has fulfilled all these three aspects. And a proof of that, we've brought our African brothers, the AU and the IGAD, to assess the election, which is another huge success throughout the election. That's how I see it from my perspective, Zelalem.
Excuse me, Zelalem, may I add to what Delawit have said? Well, what I observed very well is the fact that Africans have begun, or they have started, to have confidence in their own organizations. Like, if we just go back to election eras, when elections took place in Ethiopia, we had, just the habit of inviting the European Union or other Western institutions to come over and validate the outcomes of the elections. But now this time, IGAD and the African Union have taken, just that job, which is, of course, to see to what level it has been democratically implemented, the process, and especially the one that both of you have mentioned, the fact that transparent and coordinated election, the need to have a transparent and a coordinated election was also the focus of these organizations. That is a very good thing. So the other thing is, of course, the African Union and IGAD, they don't impose on African countries on the way how the process of these elections or these voting should be. Rather, they consider the actual context of these African countries, including Ethiopia, and so that they would be they would do the job to make good ground for the elections to go properly. And the other thing is, of course, the Western organizations say, the European Union, they want to impose. They just, have strict rules, and they want you to follow them. And we need to consider the fact that, the context in Africa and the context in Europe or elsewhere, they're not the same. So when elections, take place, the context in which these elections take place should be considered. Now, the African Union and IGAD, as they observed how the voting in these elections were going on, they just considered all these things, and that's why we can say that it was just going in a smooth way. And as we have also observed, and as they have also confirmed, these elections were really taking place in a democratic way, in a democratic manner. We just didn't have, any serious issues related to the votings. And of course, the report of the AU and IGAD have also been acceptable to the European Union. And it's because, the voting process was very much transparent, and it took place in a way that is coordinated. So the fact that we start to rely on African institutions is being clearly observed, which is a very good thing, and it has to be enhanced further.
Yeah. By the way, finally, the European Union come to accept and welcome the reports in the observation of IGAD and the African Union, the two Pan-African organizations which deployed their observers in the 7th general election of Ethiopia. But let me mention some of the points mentioned by the African Union Election Observation Mission. Like I said, the election observation mission for the African Union was led by the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, and Uhuru Kenyatta provided a media briefing on the 3rd of June 2026, and the African Union observed the Ethiopian election process in 3 phases: before the election, before the voting day, during the voting day, and after the voting day. And before the voting day, for example, the African Union has observed the registration and the whole election reforms. And for example, the African Union commended the fact that more than 54 million people were registered for election, and this is unprecedented and unparalleled. In particular, if you compare this figure with the previous elections, 6 successive elections of Ethiopia, and this is by far the largest democratic exercise in the continent. And the other was, the National Election Board of Ethiopia has introduced a digital platform, as we know, and that digital platform named Mirchaye, which can roughly be translated in English as My Choice. And by downloading that application from their gadgets, users, voters can register themselves digitally. So digitally and manually, in both ways, people were registered, and that was also appreciated. The introduction of technology into election. As we know, Ethiopia is also, registering significant strides in terms of technology, in terms of digital technology, in terms of of artificial intelligence and in terms of digital stuffs. So it's great that the National Election Board of Ethiopia has embraced this and has included technology to the election process, in particular helping and assisting millions of voters to get access to this registration. You know, more than 5.5 million people, by the way, were registered electronically, and that was appreciated by the African Union, and the African Union Election Observation Mission also appreciated the National Election Board of Ethiopia's effort to assist IDPs, internally displaced people, students, security personnel, reside in different parts of the country. And during the voting day, the African Union Election Observation Mission has observed lots of things, and the African Union Election Observation Mission head, Uhuru Kenyatta, the former president of Kenya, expressed the voting process as peaceful and orderly. And the African Union, of course, commended the National Election Board of Ethiopia for its professional handling of the voting process. As we know, 54 million people is huge in number, so to administer that needs operational efficiency, and the African Union admired and appreciated the National Election Board of Ethiopia's effort in this regard. And the African Union, of course, expressed its commitment to work with Ethiopia in the future. And the African Union congratulated Ethiopians, the civil society, the National Election Board of Ethiopia, the government, Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, and other civil society organizations and other stakeholders for conducting such peaceful and democratic election. I think Africans can learn a lot from this 7th general election of Ethiopia. And as IGAD Election Observation Mission, the former Deputy President of Uganda, Dr. Kazibwe, said, it is a benchmark. It could be a benchmark for other African countries in terms of conducting peaceful and democratic election. And I think a lot can be learned about this. And I think the European Union and other organizations apart from this continent have taken their own lessons.
Yes, Adam. Yeah, excuse me. When you mentioned, what other African countries can draw from the 7th elections in Ethiopia, well, something crosses my mind. Well, when we go back and see, how really elections were taking place in Ethiopia, when we had elections, in the 1990s and then in the 2000s, and then, from time to time there have been, progress in terms of voter engagement, in terms of democratic procedures followed. However, we just started with, we can say, pseudo democratic elections. In some cases, we had intimidations from the ruling party to say parties themselves. The parties were intimidated by the ruling party, and in the next election again, voters were intimidated, and the procedures were very much unknown to most voters as to how to go by voting. In some cases, we had wrongdoings. For example, casting votes in the ballot boxes by the ruling party themselves. Okay, and these kinds of practices have not been reported in these 7th elections, and I could see that no report has been made regarding possible intimidation of, say, candidates or parties, okay, by the government or by the ruling party. Now, this is, an outcome that has been, gained from the previous experiences. And as Zelalem specifically said it, other African countries, can draw lessons from the 7th general election in Ethiopia, and especially voter engagement and regional oversight will be, of course, the important points that other countries, may draw lesson from Ethiopia's elections.
Exactly, governments. Whenever there was election in the past years, there was a kind of frustration on the part of the public. We expected like chaos, violence, crisis, and all kind of that. And intimidation, harassment, and arrest were very much common in the previous elections. And in this 7th general election, as the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission reported, there was no fundamental human rights violation. And like we repeatedly said, the IGAD and the African Union also reported that the election was conducted in a peaceful manner, and they appreciated the peaceful nature of the election. When people go to the polling station, when they get out of the polling station, during the voting day and after the voting day, there was no considerable crisis and violation of human and democratic rights of citizens. And I think this is something that can be drawn as a lesson by other African countries. Magdalena, what's your last word in this regard?
Well, I'd like to conclude by saying that the 7th general, we hope to say that the 7th general election of Ethiopia was done through ballots and not bullets, which is a huge achievement in an African election prior to our previous history as Africa. And last, even though we're surprised that the African Union participated in such amounts, but if you see what Ethiopia means to Africa, I guess this is a necessity, since we're the second most populous country in the continent, and we're the host of the AU headquarters. We're one of the most impactful countries in the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia. And I guess that's why we, even Pulse of Africa, give a special attention to this election as a whole. And I think the point worth noting from these elections is that it was not perfect, but the fact that millions of citizens went and trusted these processes and casted their votes shows a lot that it was a progress after all. And my general assessment of this general election was that if there is one thing that I'd like to remember from this election is that it is the determination of the ordinary citizens. Despite the challenges, they came out, stood in line, and casted their vote, trusting the process, and that is actually the true spirit of democracy after all.
Magdalena Naga and Gamachisa Mandida, thank you very much for your beautiful ideas and golden perspectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zelalem, for having us.
And that brings us to the end of our roundup. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.